We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
Hello and welcome to another Planet Holyrood. I'm Paul Hutcheon, political editor of the Daily Record. I'm joined this week by Rodger, who's the chief reporter with the Sunday Mail, and Ben Borland, who's the editor of the Scottish Daily Express. So I think that the worst kept secret in Scottish politics has finally been confirmed. Nicola Sturgeon, the former First Minister, will not be contesting the next election. She's going to stand down. This is not a surprise in any way. It was widely expected, but it still feels important. I mean, regardless of what you think about Nicola Sturgeon, she was the first ever female First Minister, the longest serving First Minister of Scotland. I think she served for 9 years, which is a pretty incredible spell to be in charge of a country. I mean, what can you say about Nicola Sturgeon, really? I mean, OK, let's just cut to the chase. Her legacy, good or bad?
I'll go first. I think she thought her legacy was going to be trans rights. I think she pitched that as her legacy project. And I think it is going to be her legacy, just not in the way she hoped. I think it's going to be a legacy that's to borrow a phrase from J.K. Rowling's T-shirt, that she was the destroyer of women's rights. I think that's going to go down as her legacy, in my opinion. But this all happened quite late in her career.
She wanted that to be her legacy? Really?
I think she wasn't going to get a legacy of an independent Scotland. I mean, what else could her legacy be? A shoebox full of nappies given out?
Well, I think, look at it from her perspective, though. She came in and she said that her number one priority was to cut the educational attainment gap. So, judge her on that, she failed. Clearly, she was agitating for Indy Ref 2 for pretty much the entire time of her spell in charge, maybe with a few pauses during COVID. That never materialised. I would judge her on those things and the state of public services. I don't think she ever said that GRR is my priority. I think she probably saw that as a piece of uncontroversial legislation that might be passed quickly. I don't think she ever envisaged that it would ever blow up in the way it did. But, I think her legacy is no Indy Ref 2, no genuine reform to public services, and a divided country. You go back to 2014 and we had this bitter, divisive referendum. Some folk thought it was a good thing, some folk thought it was a bad thing. I think what we really needed at that point when Salmond stood down was somebody to bring the country together, to heal Scotland. But I mean, my criticism of Nicola Sturgeon is that she never did that. And I think for those 9 years, she always dangled the prospect of a second independence referendum in front of people that she never had the power to deliver. So she was always winding up pro-UK voters and always giving pro-independence voters this sort of false sense of hope. And
do you not think, you're saying that you feel the country needed a leader that was going to bring it back together after Indy Ref and after Salmond? I don't know if that necessarily is possible under a nationalist First Minister, because they are always going to have that agenda of separation. So how would she have brought the country back together? Because on one hand, if she says, right, I'm just going to park the independence idea, that's going to piss off a hell of a lot of her supporters. But I
think she could have levelled with the public and voters. I think she could have said, look, I'm always going to believe in independence. I'm always going to push for it. But it's a reserved issue. And I just don't think any sort of legal expert believed for a second that an independence referendum was under the control of the Scottish Parliament. So to me, it was an illusion that she was peddling on that.
It was so short-sighted. She could have said, she took over in November 2014. We just had a referendum where Scots voted decisively to stay in the United Kingdom. we were told it was a once in a generation. Sturgeon herself said it was once in a lifetime, that one time at the Parliament. She initially said, right, okay, it's off the table. She should have stuck to that promise. If the SNP, they could have made a convincing argument that 10 years is a political generation. Mm-hmm. And I mean, 25 years is probably a generation, but they could have made the argument 10 years is a political generation. And we'd be in the middle of another referendum campaign right now. Mm. Instead, she took it off the table for around about a year. It came straight back on after Brexit. Well, it was Brexit, I think she said, was the material change in circumstances. But I think it was already, a bandwagon was already rolling. Mm-hmm. So it never got taken away. The SNP could have just taken it off the table and said, right, in a generation, as promised, we're coming back to this.
She never respected the result. I think that's why pro-UK voters are so hostile towards her. I don't think
it's just Nicola Sturgeon who's not respected the result. You know, I would say that for the majority of high-profile SNP politicians. Mm. You know, none of them have respected the result because, well, it depends what you mean by respected, but because it wasn't the result that they wanted. You know, and I do agree with you that it has contributed to a sort of widely fractured country that we have now, where it is very much like who's in the yes camp, who's in the no camp. That's never really gone away. I
think fundamentally, Nicola Sturgeon led a devolved government, mm-hmm. but her main focus, apart from COVID, was on a reserved issue mm-hmm. of independence and Indy Ref 2. And I think it's no coincidence that the public services are in the state they're in. Mm-hmm. You look at drug deaths, you look at education, NHS waiting lists, which of course there's a huge COVID element there. But if she'd been as passionate about public services as she had been about constitutional change, which she ultimately had no power to deliver, I think the country would be in a much better position.
But even if she was as passionate about the education system as she claimed to be, you know, like you said, she made it a kind of like John Swinney has with child poverty. She made like bridging the attainment gap and improving education standards her sort of, you know, we should judge her on. And
her number one priority,
yeah,
she said.
She completely failed on that. And it's like, well, why did you not put as much effort into that which you want us to judge you on than this, as you say, the constitutional issue, which is not really within your gift?
And imagine she had actually substantially closed the attainment gap. Mm-hmm. You know, that would be a pretty good argument for then saying, well, look, if Scotland was independent, we could tackle the other deep-seated problems in society. That would have been a better platform for Indy Ref 2 than simply...
A long-term or even a medium-term strategy would have been spend 10 years improving Scotland, running everything really well under devolved powers, and then say, right, that's 10 years up, we're coming back to it. And
well, that's the unfortunate thing, I think, because, you know, we have seen with the SNP, they're incapable of managing large infrastructure projects. They're incapable of managing significant elements of the economy, of, you know, education system, health system. So none of these are good adverts for an independent Scotland, unfortunately. And maybe there should have been a bit more focus on, instead of fighting for a second referendum so quickly, there should have been more focus on actually just doing the day-to-day stuff and doing it properly and not making a mess of things. And, you know, regardless of your opinion of the gender recognition reform, I think that we can probably agree that it was the wrong thing to focus on and to put so much focus on. And again, that's contributed to this culture war, this divide among people, and, you know, particularly with the gender issue, that is now something that I don't think can be bridged. You cannot bring those two sides together. There is no kind of common ground that can be had there. And I think, you know, what both of you are saying, that there was just too much focus on generally the wrong things under Nicola Sturgeon.
Do you think that's something in society today that people can't seem to get on with people they disagree with? It's the same with the with independence to a degree. It's the same in the trans debate. It's like, surely it should be possible to have a different opinion on something politically.
I know, but I think that's to do with social media as well, like the polarisation. People are kind of very polarised now.
Yeah,
where they're
it's
not
like
used
you're either
to...
this camp or that camp,
Yeah.
and there's no...
I think though as well, like Sturgeon, her legacy, but not one that she would want to have as her legacy, is a legacy of secrecy and yeah, I suppose secrecy is the right word, you know, like just not being transparent with people and that sort of trying to make out as if she was leading this forward-thinking, left-leaning, open government who was take responsibility when they needed to. And actually in the last couple of years, we have seen that completely dismantled.
Such as with the deletion of the COVID WhatsApps.
Deletion of COVID WhatsApps. And that's also obviously extended into government, what was happening, you know, within her own party, with, you know, the finances, whatever the situation is there. Clearly what was being said on the outside is not what was going on the inside.
We'll come to Branchform later. See, if you were to compare her to other centre-left leaders, you know, let's say Tony Blair, his legacy in government was devolution, minimum wage, tax credits, ECHR, social chapter. I know you probably don't agree with any of those, but
Well, the
you know,
Iraq War.
Yeah, I was going to say
Well,
maybe a
but-
little bit of a war somewhere.
But there was a sort of domestic progressive agenda there. Gordon Brown was credited for the way that he dealt with the financial crisis. I'm trying to... What would you say Nicola Sturgeon's main achievement is in office if you're looking at it from her perspective of centre-left politics? Because
Well, it's going to be the baby box, isn't it? I mean, I'm not saying it's a great one, but it's the only one that
I'd probably
can
say
point
Scottish
to.
child payment, actually.
Well,
that-
yeah, okay.
Was that under her, though? That wasn't an Alex Salmond.
No, that was a Sturgeon.
That was a
I
Sturgeon.
mean, I think Scottish child payment, baby box, and then I think maybe the expansion of free childcare for parents, that's had an impact. So you can probably make a case for a narrative of helping
Children.
parents and children. But after 9 years, there isn't really the transformative change. You know, she could have scrapped the council tax and replaced it with a progressive alternative, or closed the educational attainment gap, or reformed and modernised the NHS, but that just didn't happen. And I
Or
just
tackle drug deaths in
Yeah.
in any meaningful way. I mean, it's not been reversed whatsoever.
I'm not saying it's 9 wasted years, but I would say disappointment.
I think it's 2 years since she stepped down as First Minister.
Yeah.
And, you know, we all know, we've all seen the figures. She's barely been at Holyrood. She's hardly took part in any debates, really. And I think a Prime Minister would have stepped down as an MP, especially after serving for so long.
I mean, look at
don't-
Theresa May, for example, when she obviously stepped down as Prime Minister and she continued to be an MP. You know, she didn't
But
kind of
she
sit
did,
back
yeah.
and
But
do
she
nothing.
took a very active role on
Well,
the back
exactly, and
benches.
she was always in the chamber, always making points, and when she stood up to speak, people listened to what she had
Yeah.
to say. She was a very sort of powerful figure in the back benches.
And she's quite a critical
Exact-
figure as well.
Exactly. But, you know, at least she was participating in her job that she was paid handsomely to do. And unfortunately, you know, I think that's one of my biggest disappointments, actually, is to see Nicola Sturgeon's post-First Minister sort of career. She is still a serving MSP. She is still being paid to be an MSP, and yet she appears to be doing basically nothing in that job. And I think it's shameful. And I think I never would have expected that of somebody such as Nicola Sturgeon.
She's still got a year to go. Really, she should be resigning today. I mean, there's 19 current and former SNP MSPs who've now said they'll step down. Humza Yousaf, Nicola Sturgeon being the two biggest names, Fiona Hislop,
Robertson.
Shona Robertson,
Yeah.
Nicola's old pal. There are big names, and this is with a year to go. It's
It'll be
essentially a
interesting.
sort of zombie government with all... I think we've worked it out. There's about a third of the parliamentary party has said, that's it, we're
Yeah.
off next May.
It'll be really interesting, actually, to see what John Swinney is like and what his who his sort of allies are after the next election, because all of his old guard, like chums, are going to be gone.
And
You know, so
he
who
was ready to go as well.
I know, well,
Yeah,
He'll be looking at Sturgeon and Robeson probably feeling jealous.
yeah.
Particularly if he loses the election.
Well, yeah, but, you know, I think that is an interesting point, though, is like, who's going to be his ally now? Like, who are going to be his best pals and his confidants, because all of them are leaving.
It's going to be a change group.
Yeah.
It's impossible to discuss Nicola Sturgeon's 26 years at Holyrood without focusing on the relationship that probably defined her political career. That's the relationship with Alex Salmond. So, you know, for the first part of devolution, she was his deputy at Holyrood. She did FMQs when he was at Westminster. Salmond wins in 2007. She becomes deputy first minister. She was always going to be the successor. You know, they were really close politically. And then Sturgeon becomes FM, and their relationship just completely disintegrates after the investigation into sexual harassment complaints against Salmond. It just nosedived because he wanted her to stop the investigation. Interesting theory that in retrospect. Imagine if she had done that and what we'd be saying.
Well, yes. Yeah.
But, you know, I think the last few years of her time as First Minister were kind of defined by this dogfight, this terrible relationship she had with Salmond, who, let's face it, was trying to bring her down.
Yeah.
But she was trying to, you know, equally she was trying to bring him down.
No, I don't.
I don't think that.
I'm not
no.
saying in the big conspiracy. I mean, she didn't want him to make a comeback. She didn't want a rival figure as
But
the
I
sort
don't
of
think that's
head
the
of the
reason
nationalism
for-
movement. I'm not saying that's the reason for it all starting, but once the scrap was underway, she wanted to finish Salmond
I
off
don't
just
know.
as much as.
I don't know. I don't agree with that. I
think?
think she was put in a really tough position in the sense she was taking over from somebody who's such a huge presence, huge character, who didn't like not being in charge.
It's
So
kind of, you know, sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, so, you know, you are the leader. It's kind of like, I don't know, having like Vladimir Putin as your deputy or something like that. You know, really, like, you're not the one in charge. Like, clearly Salmond wouldn't like the fact that Nicola Sturgeon, you know, came in, and I think Nicola Sturgeon probably wanted to do things her way. And in his head, he probably thought, well, she's going to be in charge, but I'm still going to have a lot of the power. So when she started saying, well, actually, I don't agree with that.
Okay.
That's my sense anyway.
I mean, like, we've made a lot of criticisms of Sturgeon so far. See, over the last, say, 5-7 years, when you had this war between Salmond and Sturgeon, I don't blame Sturgeon for that. I blame Salmond.
Yeah, me too.
I
mean, what was she meant? Like, you know, I think for anyone in that situation where you have these allegations, it was just going to be impossible for her because of her relationship. But at the same time, the things that Alex Salmond actually admitted to doing, you know.
Yeah, and it was right. It
There,
was
of
right
course,
that,
would be an
you know,
investigation
it was
into
right
that.
those complaints were investigated. The problem was that the Scottish government ballsed it up.
Yeah.
It's not, but Salmond just didn't believe that they should be investigated and put her in an impossible position, and then just had this grudge for the remainder of his life.
Exactly.
So, you know, I actually feel sorry for Nicola Sturgeon when it comes to Salmond. I do think that he betrayed her. I think that he hounded her, tried to bring her down, and I think that was a part of her decision to resign.
I think, though, you can't compare the two politically. Salmond was a master politician for all his faults, which were, you know, many and well documented. He was a master politician. He was always a few steps ahead of everyone else.
Yep.
During the time he was First Minister, you talk about legacies, loads of things happened that you'd look back and go, right, that was a big change that happened under Alex Salmond.
Mm-hmm.
Sturgeon came in, I think she was always sort of this great number two, but she just didn't know how to do this. So she was actually First Minister for longer than he was and achieved very, very little.
I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier. I think a lot of her tenure was like smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
You know, she made out as if she was leading this progressive yada yada, and actually when you lift the curtain away, it was all just a load of crap.
I think Salmond was a better.
Exactly.
I think Salmond was a better First Minister. Sturgeon was a better person.
Agree.
I put that gently.
Okay, yeah, well,
I think an unresolved or unfinished chapter in Nicola Sturgeon's career or life would be Operation Branchform, which is the ongoing police investigation into allegations of fraud from when she was leader and her husband was chief executive. Obviously,
Ex-husband?
Well, I think they're still married, so
estranged.
Yes, separated.
Yeah.
So he's currently been charged. She was arrested and then released without charge, and we're still waiting to see what more, if anything, is going to happen. But I mean, there's no getting around it. That's been a black cloud over her for years now. And when people, if you ask someone on the street, what do you think of when you think of Nicola Sturgeon? I would imagine a lot of folk will talk about the police tent outside of our garden or in our house.
Van on the Christmas special.
Either the camper van or the police tent. It's just it's become an iconic moment, I think, in recent Scottish political history. And until that is resolved one way or the other, it's damaged her reputation.
Yes, yeah. I mean, there's no getting around that. She is married, but was married to Peter Morell. He is now being charged. She was arrested and then released. The suggestion that if there was any wrongdoing, that she had no knowledge about it is, questionable. So I think just her involvement in this in any way is going to be damaging to her reputation. Never mind the fact that the police erected a giant tent in her front garden.
Which I think was about privacy. I think it was privacy for Sturgeon and Murrell more than anything else.
I think it was also to privacy for the investigation because they were obviously having to remove the items from the house and they didn't want, all of us basically seeing everything that they were doing. But I think that the interesting thing about the Branchform, that specific moment with the tent, it kind of lent itself to this conspiracy of, the police are just doing this to make Sturgeon look bad and it's all an MI5, whatever. I mean, I just find that whole thing laughable, but I agree that basically Branchform, well, for all our sakes, needs to be resolved sooner rather than later. But even if she is not implicated in any way going forward, I still think that she's been tarnished by it, given her relationship with Peter Morell, who's been charged.
And the obvious fact that she was so closely involved in controlling the SNP's finances. There's that infamous leaked video where she was threatening
Sunday Mail exclusive.
Sunday Mail exclusive, indeed.
Yeah.
Threatening other members of the NEC not to speak about the finances.
Yeah, saying, their finances are absolutely fine. But again, sorry to keep saying it, the bloody smoke and mirrors, she says one thing and actually it's just categorically the opposite.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's obviously hard, Branchform. It's a live investigation. There's not much you can say that's beyond just sort of stating the facts of what's happened so far. But I think you can look ahead. We're a year and a month away from the next Holyrood election. This time next year, Parliament will be finished. We'll be into the election campaign. How quickly can this resolve before May 2026? I mean, it's...
You mean like the whole, if there is a court process...
If there is to be a court process...
Yeah, no, it's not going to be finished by then.
So, I mean, this is still going to be an election issue.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced it's going to be a massive election issue.
Well, I don't think it will be now, given that Nicola Sturgeon stepped down, Peter Morell was no longer in post. I don't know what's happening with Colin Beattie. Is he stepping down? He's running again?
Well, I don't think he's announced his intentions.
I think he said he'd like to.
Right. So it could be a bit of an election issue in that respect, but, I don't...
Put it this way, if the pro-UK parties are hoping this is going to be the winning card from them, I think they might be disappointed.
Yeah, because I think under John Swinney, even though he is an old man...
A wise owl?
No, like a veteran, SNP politician. I think that he has actually done quite a good job of trying to say, look, the SNP is not the same under me as it has been in recent times. So, and he certainly hasn't been implicated in any of this Branchform stuff. So I think he could quite reasonably make the argument that, yeah, it's unfortunate, but it nothing to do with me. We'll
But
deal with it.
he
and
could have
move
made
on.
that argument at the general election, and yet all the MPs who lost their seats, the consensus seemed to be that it was Branchform that was to blame.
Yeah, but was that not to do with the timing? Because the Branchform, what was happening with Branchform at that time?
So Peter Murrell had been charged in the April, I think, and then
the thing was in
general
June.
election was in
yeah,
the
so it was like right
June,
before,
June,
and there was a
July.
lot of activity going on. So people, whereas now, if it remains like this between now and the next election, people are just going to forget about it.
Surely, well, anyway, let's not speculate
Yeah.
about
So it brings us, obviously, to another question that people are asking, what next for Nicola Sturgeon after she stands down? I mean, obviously, she's got her memoirs.
Yep.
I imagine they will be legally edited. There's
Do we know when that's coming out yet?
Might that be linked to Branchform as well? Might that have to be...
She's not going to put anything about Branchform in there.
She probably wants
Me and
to...
Peter went away in the bloody caravan.
She might use that as a chance to put her side of the story or clear her name. I don't know, but I mean, maybe
I
she'll
don't think
just...
she's going to do that. That's
maybe
very
she'll just steer clear of it.
un-Sturgeon-like.
Also, I mean, speaking as three journalists, I mean, what your memoirs, maybe 100,000 words?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's taken a long time to write 100,000 words.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd be...
I usually write that every week.
Well, yeah, you'd think 1,000 words a day is doable,
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah, it's
I'd hope
definitely-
so. I mean, obviously, we're forgetting
she
about
should
her
have finished long ago.
aspiring career as a comedian.
Oh, yes, yeah, that's this. It starts today, actually, Glasgow
Nicola
Comedy Festival.
Sturgeon, the stand-up. I mean, has she been known for a sense of humour?
No, absolutely not. She has literally no sense of humour at all. So
That might actually make the show very watchable. Watching someone who is not funny try to be funny.
But I don't know if she's trying to be funny, is she? I know it's at the comedy festival, but I thought the whole point was not. I don't know. I'm not an expert on her.
Chuckles
show.
and giggles, yeah. I mean,
I think her going forward, she's going to be trying to, as we've seen, position herself as a literary expert, and going around doing talks at book festivals and things, which, I think when she resigned as First Minister, she probably was eyeing up a much more prestigious job. For example,
UN, WHO.
yeah, exactly. But something on the sort of international sort of political landscape or development, something like that. That's just all fallen away. So unfortunately, she's probably just going to be in your local Waterstones.
I reckon she'll have a better
Signing.
political afterlife than Alex Salmond. I mean, I can't imagine Sturgeon's going to front a TV show that's broadcast by Russia Today, for instance.
Well,
or
I think-
at least I would hope not.
I think you look at Salmond and Sturgeon and their post-Holyrood careers, it just makes it even more baffling why the SNP don't drop the opposition to the House of Lords.
Right.
And
What
that,
are you talking about?
well, you could have had, I mean, you could get Baroness Sturgeon of Dreghorn.
But why would that be valuable?
Well, because she'd still have a role to play in the nation's political life.
Yeah, but I don't.
That's what-
I think Nicola Sturgeon will still have a role to play, but it's whether she chooses to or not. If she wants to still have a role in politics, then she can still do that without having to sit in the House of Lords.
But there aren't any other roles. Once you're no longer an elected politician,
Well,
all
if you look
these
at Gordon
SNP
Brown,
grand-
Tony Blair, they're still they're like John Major, even like their opinions, their voices still matter. They're
Yeah,
still
I think
doing
there's a
work.
role for her in that, definitely.
Yeah.
Sort of.
But I don't think Nicola Sturgeon, to be honest, I get the sense she's kind of done with politics.
She'd be,
Well,
if there was ever to be Indy Ref 2, I'm not sure there will be, but if there was ever to be Indy Ref, she'd be the obvious person to lead
Yeah, the campaign.
the campaign.
right?
Maybe not the
You've done
person
such a good
to-
job of all the other campaigns.
Maybe not the person to actually
would you
woo no
What,
voters,
to lead
but
the... Well, I'd pick Nicola Sturgeon because she's guaranteed to lose it. Simple as that. I don't know. I mean, I just think that there is a legitimate platform for politicians after their elected period, and the SNP choose not to engage
Yeah,
with
but
it.
there's platforms that are not in the House of Lords. I mean, the House of Lords is barely a platform.
I mean, I'm not, I don't want to see loads of SNP peers, but
Yes, you do.
From
You do.
well, it would mean we could keep putting Nicola Sturgeon in headlines. So
That's all you care about.
Final
Red
question,
lines.
just a very quick one. Did Nicola Sturgeon leave Scotland in a better place than when she found it, when she took over in 2014?
I am going to say no.
no, was.
3 no's.
On that.
Thanks for the memories, Nicola.
Yeah. No, I think going back to what you said at the very beginning, I think she's left a much more divided country than when she took over, and she took over right after the independence referendum. So it would be hard at that point to imagine that Scotland would be even more divided, but I think it is today.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thanks very much to Hannah and to Ben for joining us again. You can listen to this episode of Planet Holyrood on Spotify or Apple Music, or watch it on the Daily Record YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok for the latest news and the best bits of the podcast.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it